The air in the courtroom was thick with tension as Judge Linda Greyson took her seat, holding her gavel. Today's case was a familiar one. A single father, Jonathan, standing trial for the theft of expensive medications for his sick daughter. But Judge Linda had no idea that what seemed like a regular day was about to turn into something completely unexpected. As the proceedings began, Jonathan's eyes were downcast, his heart heavy with the weight of his actions. He knew the law was clear, but he couldn't feel remorse for what he'd done. Still, he braced himself for the inevitable sentence. Judge Linda listened intently, her years of experience guiding her through the case. But as she delved deeper into the details, something caught her eye, a connection she had long ago resigned herself to never finding. The man in front of her looked suspiciously familiar, and yet she couldn't place him anywhere. Had he recently served her at a restaurant? Was he the man who'd pumped gas in her car the week before? He could be anyone, and yet she had the nagging feeling that he was someone very, very important for her. And judging by the crime he'd committed, he was very important for someone else as well. The daughter who depended on him for everything and her two older sisters. What would they do if she sent their father to prison for stealing something they desperately needed? She knew his youngest daughter was sick, after all, and yet he could have gone about obtaining those medicines in several other ways. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Judge Linda knew she had to uphold the law, no matter what her heart told her. With a somber expression, she pronounced the sentence, 1 year in prison for Jonathan. As the guards escorted the single father away, Linda's heart sank. Suddenly, something in the man's expression reminded her of a boy she'd last seen many, many years ago, and that birthmark on his neck. Could this be? No, he couldn't. Or could he? He did look disturbingly like her long-lost son. As she watched Jonathan being carried away, she felt like she'd just made a terrible mistake. She had done her duty, but at what price? The memories of the boy she had lost so many years ago threatened to overwhelm her. Days passed, and Linda found herself unable to shake the feeling that she had made a mistake. Jonathan's sad and defeated face stayed in her mind, which bothered her deeply. She couldn't let it go, so she decided to do something brave. She needed to find out the truth. Arranging a private meeting with Jonathan in the visitation room, Linda approached him with trembling hands. "I know this must be confusing," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I have to know, do you remember anything about your birth parents?" Jonathan's brow furrowed in confusion. "My adoptive parents passed away years ago. I've always been told I was an orphan." Linda nodded. A glimmer of hope in her eyes as they hovered on the birthmark on his neck. "What if I told you that I believe you might be my son? The one I lost 38 years ago." The words hung in the air, the silence deafening as Jonathan tried to process the unthinkable. Could this be true? After all these years, had he finally found the mother he never knew? Without a word, Linda produced a DNA test kit, her hands shaking. "If you're willing, I'd like us to take this test. I have to know for sure." Stunned, Jonathan could only nod. The implications of this moment overwhelming him. As the sample was collected, the two sat in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their hearts beating in sync with the clocks ticking. Days passed, and the results finally arrived. Linda's eyes scanned the paperwork, her breath catching in her throat. "It's a match," she whispered the next time she went visiting Jonathan. The tears she had held back for years were now streaming down her face. "You're my son!" Jonathan's world shifted on its axis. This woman, the one who had just sentenced him to a year in prison, was his mother? The mother he had never known, the one he had resigned himself to never finding. A whirlwind of emotions swept through him, relief, joy, and a touch of resentment. Linda reached across the table, her hand trembling. "I know this is a lot to take in. I've spent the last 38 years wondering what happened to you, and now here you are." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Jonathan. So very sorry." Jonathan's walls began to crumble, and he reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers. "It's not your fault," he murmured, his own tears now falling freely. "You couldn't have known." From that moment on, a bond began to form. A connection that transcended the roles of judge and defendant. Linda knew she was responsible for upholding the law, but her heart yearned to make amends for the lost years, to reclaim the family she had been denied. So she did something shocking. Determined to help, Linda took another look at Jonathan's case. She carefully reviewed every detail, focusing on why Jonathan had acted as he did. The desperate actions of a single father trying to save his sick daughter. She soon realized that he could not have in fact gone any other way about obtaining those medicines because he had exhausted every other possibility. So Linda requested that the case be reconsidered, pointing out new factors that hadn't been fully considered before. She emphasized that Jonathan was a single dad caring for a seriously ill child, and highlighted Jonathan's clean record, his dedication to his daughter, and the nonviolent nature of his crime. She suggested an alternative punishment, one that would allow him to care for his daughter while still facing the consequences of his actions. After discussing it with her colleagues, Linda succeeded in reducing Jonathan's sentence. Instead of going to prison, he was put on probation. This allowed him to stay home and care for his daughter, ensuring she received the needed treatment. The probation came with strict conditions, including community service, regular check-ins with a probation officer, and participation in a program that legally helped people access necessary medications. Linda also made sure that Jonathan and his daughter received additional support from social services. Though it wasn't the usual decision, many in the legal community understood the special circumstances. Justice was still served, but with an eye on the well-being of an innocent child and the possibility for Jonathan to rebuild his life. As Jonathan was freed, his 3 daughters greeted him, their faces alight with joy and relief. But the greatest reunion was yet to come as Linda ushered them all into her home, welcoming them into her life. It was a bittersweet homecoming as the family, long separated by circumstance, began to heal the wounds of the past. Linda vowed to make up for the lost time, to shower her son and grandchildren with the love and support they deserved. When they got home, Linda found herself awake, unable to sleep. The events of the past weeks had left her mind racing. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, mindful not to disturb Jonathan. She walked into the kitchen and made herself a cup of coffee. The familiar smell helped calm her nerves. Linda moved to the living room and sat down. Her eyes wandered to the framed photos on the wall, pictures of a life she used to know, a family she had lost. That time felt so far away now, like it was from another world. "I'm so sorry, my child," she whispered into the silence, her voice thick with regret. "If only I had known." The pain of losing her son had never gone away. It was a wound that never healed. She had tried to find him, but she had never been able to. With a heavy sigh, Linda rose and pulled a photo album from the shelf. Page by page, she immersed herself in the memories. Her pregnancy, photos of Jonathan when he was still a baby, and a tear-stained snapshot of an empty crib. "I never stopped looking for you, my son," she murmured, her fingers tracing the delicate features of the infant. "Not a day went by that I didn't wonder where you were." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Linda quickly wiped away her tears. Looking back, she found Jonathan standing there. "I couldn't sleep," he explained, his voice barely audible. "I hope I'm not intruding." Linda shook her head, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "Not at all. Please come." As they settled onto the couch, the air thick with unspoken emotions, Linda reached out and took his hand. "I know this has been a lot to take in," she began, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm here for you. No matter what. I may have lost 38 years with you, but I'm determined to make up for that time if you'll let me." Jonathan's eyes glistened with tears, overwhelmed by the pain and the new connection. "I want that too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But there's so much I don't know." Linda nodded, her thumb gently caressing his hand. "Then ask me anything, my son. I'll tell you everything I can." And so, the mother and son began to unravel the past, weaving together the pieces of their shared story. It was a journey of discovery and healing, the start of an unbreakable bond. Linda shared the agonizing details of the day she had lost her son, the heartbreak that had consumed her. "It was a cold December night," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was young, just 19, and unmarried. My parents were furious when they found out I was pregnant, and they gave me an ultimatum: give up the baby or leave home." She paused, collecting herself before continuing. "I tried to make it work on my own, working 2 jobs and trying to care for you on my own. One night I left you with a neighbor while I worked a late shift. When I came back, the apartment was empty. The neighbor was gone, and so were you." Linda's voice broke as she recalled the panic and despair that had overwhelmed her that night. "I called the police, but they couldn't find any leads. The neighbor had used a fake name, and there was no trace of where you'd been taken. I spent years searching, hiring private investigators, but it was like you'd vanished into thin air." Linda wiped away a tear. "I never stopped wondering if you were safe, if you were loved, if you were even alive." Jonathan listened intently, his eyes misting over as he shared his story. "I was adopted by the Miller's family when I was just a few months old," he started. "They were kind people and they gave me a good life. But I always felt like something was missing, like there was a piece of me I couldn't quite grasp. I had a pretty normal childhood, I guess. But when I was 16, my adoptive mom was diagnosed with cancer. It was aggressive, and within a year, she was gone. Jonathan's voice wavered slightly. My adoptive dad was never the same after that. He tried his best, but he was lost without her. He passed away from a heart attack just after I turned 21. Jonathan paused, gathering his thoughts. I was alone then, trying to figure out life on my own. I met Sarah when I was 23, and it was like the sun came out after a long storm. We got married a year later, and soon we had our first daughter. A small smile played on his lips as he remembered those happier times. But life had more challenges in store, he continued, his expression growing somber. A few years ago, Sarah was in a terrible car accident on her way home from work. The doctors did everything they could, but her injuries were too severe. He paused, swallowing hard. She passed away after 3 days in the ICU, leaving me to raise our 3 girls on my own. I was devastated, lost without her strength and support. That's when things really started to spiral. He continued, my last daughter was recently diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. The medical bills started piling up, and the medications were so expensive. I tried everything I could to make ends meet, working multiple jobs, but it wasn't enough. He looked down, ashamed. That's when I made the decision that brought me to your courtroom. Linda reached out, gently squeezing Jonathan's hand. She said softly, I had no idea about your daughter's condition. Jonathan explained the details of her illness, the treatments they'd tried, and the financial strain it had put on the family. As he spoke, Linda's expression shifted from concern to determination. Listen to me, she said, her voice firm but gentle. You're not alone anymore. We're going to face this together. From this moment on, your daughter's care is my responsibility too. Jonathan's eyes widened. Mom, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, Linda interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. I'm offering. No, I'm promising. We're going to make sure she gets the best care possible, whatever it costs. She stood up, her posture resolute. First thing tomorrow, I'll speak with the best specialists in the field. We'll set up a fund for her ongoing care. She is my granddaughter, and I will do everything in my power to see her healthy and happy. Tears welled up in Jonathan's eyes as the magnitude of his mother's promise sank in. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Linda reached out, cupping her son's face in her hands. You don't have to say anything. Just let me be the mother and grandmother I should have been all along. We're going to fight this together, as a family. As promised, Linda wasted no time arranging for the best medical care for her granddaughter. She reached out to top specialists in autoimmune disorders, using her connections as a judge to expedite appointments and consultations. Within weeks, Jonathan's daughter was admitted to a prestigious research hospital specializing in rare autoimmune diseases. The team of doctors, impressed by the complexity of her case, decided to try an experimental treatment that showed promise in clinical trials. The treatment was intense and grueling. For months, the young girl underwent targeted immunotherapy and stem cell treatments. Jonathan and Linda took turns staying at the hospital, providing constant support and encouragement. There were setbacks along the way. Some days, the side effects seemed almost unbearable, and Jonathan found himself questioning whether they had made the right choice. But Linda remained a pillar of strength, reassuring her son and granddaughter that they would get through this together. As the months passed, signs of improvement began to appear. The girl's energy levels slowly increased, and her symptoms started to diminish. The doctors, cautiously optimistic, continued to monitor her progress closely. 6 months into the treatment, the breakthrough they had all been hoping for finally came. Blood tests revealed a significant reduction in the autoimmune markers, and the girl's overall health had improved dramatically. The medical team was astounded by her recovery, noting that her case could potentially pave the way for treating other patients with similar conditions. On the day they received the news that the treatment had been successful, Jonathan broke down in tears of relief and gratitude. Linda held him close, her own eyes brimming with joyful tears. "We did it," she whispered. "She's going to be okay." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Jonathan turned to his mother, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You didn't just save her life. You saved our whole family." Linda smiled, squeezing her son's hand. "This is what family does. We stand by each other no matter what. I'm just grateful I finally have the chance to be the mother and grandmother I always wanted to be." The journey had been long and difficult, but as they walked out of the hospital together, with a healthy and smiling young girl between them, they knew that their newfound family bond had been strengthened by the challenges they had faced together. The future, once so uncertain, now seemed bright with promise and hope. As they were going to the car, Jonathan's daughter held tightly to both her father's and grandmother's hands. The light in her eyes dimmed for so long by illness, now sparkled with renewed life and hope. On the drive home, Linda couldn't help but marvel at her granddaughter's transformation. The girl's cheeks were flushed with health, and she chattered excitedly about returning to school and playing with her sisters. As they pulled into the driveway of Linda's house, Jonathan's other two daughters rushed out to greet them, the air filled with excited squeals and laughter as the family reunited. Linda stood back for a moment, watching the scene unfold. The once quiet yard now buzzed with the energy of children, a sound she had longed to hear for decades, and now it would never be silent again. So what do you think? Was justice truly served? And how do you think Linda and Jonathan will navigate the challenges of rebuilding their relationship after so many years apart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.